Have you ever felt like someone didn't just leave your life, but took a piece of you with them? What if the reason you're still hurting isn't because they're gone, but because you never truly accepted that they could leave? Letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to see clearly without the blur of hope or the sting of regret. Have you ever cared so deeply for someone that when they pulled away or disappeared entirely, it felt like your world lost color? You shared laughs, secrets, maybe even your identity with them. Then, suddenly, their absence became a strange, heavy presence. It's not just that they're gone, it's the silence they leave behind. The kind that speaks louder than words. And in that silence, a storm brews inside. You find yourself wondering, how do I let go of someone who still visits my thoughts every day? How do I release this attachment without turning cold or hollow? These aren't just emotional questions, they're deeply human ones. And this is where Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics shine a light. The Stoics didn't demand us to erase our feelings. They didn't ask us to stop loving, caring, or remembering. What they taught was mastery, not over emotions themselves, but over our reactions. They taught us not to cling, but to stand grounded in our own power. So in this video, we're going to explore 5 powerful Stoic rules that can help you emotionally detach without losing your depth or kindness. If there's even a small part of you that's ready to breathe again, to stop carrying something that no longer serves you, then stay with me. You might discover exactly what your heart has been searching for. Rule number 1. Understand the impermanence of life. Have you ever tried to hold on to someone so tightly, only to feel them slipping further away the more you tried? Maybe it was a best friend you once texted daily, or a partner you imagined a future with. One day, they were part of your everyday, woven into your routine, your identity. And the next, it's as if they faded out of your life without warning. No argument, no explanation. Just distance, silence. But that silence hurts not just because they're gone, but because we were never emotionally prepared for their absence. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." When we become emotionally attached, we don't just bond with people, we build narratives around them. We tell ourselves stories of forever, of permanence, of shared meaning. But often, those stories live only in our minds, and that's where the pain begins. We convince ourselves that our connections are solid, guaranteed, permanent. But the Stoics reminded us that nothing in this life truly belongs to us, not people, not moments, not even the youth we carry in our bodies. Everything is fleeting. That's why the very first step to emotional detachment is recognizing the impermanence of life. Now, don't confuse this with pessimism. To the Stoics, it was preparation, spiritual armor. When you accept that every chapter will eventually close, you stop clinging. You start appreciating the present for what it is, something beautiful and brief. Not something to possess, but something to experience. I remember a friendship I once had, one that lasted more than 10 years. It felt like the kind of bond that could survive anything. We shared fears, hopes, midnight conversations that lasted till dawn. But slowly, almost silently, it began to fade. Fewer texts, missed calls. I kept trying to breathe life back into it, messaging first, planning hangouts, pretending like nothing had changed. But it had. Deep down I knew. Every attempt to revive the friendship felt like pulling a weight that didn't want to move. Still, I couldn't let go. Why? Because in my heart, that friendship was meant to be forever. I wasn't grieving a friend. I was grieving a story I had written. Only when I fully accepted that the bond had run its course did I feel the freedom return. There was no betrayal, no drama, just this slow, quiet shift that life sometimes brings. And in that moment, I remembered Marcus Aurelius's words, "Accept whatever comes to you, woven in the pattern of your destiny, for what could more aptly fit your needs?" Letting go wasn't about abandoning the past. It was about returning to the present, because that's where peace lives. Imagine impermanence like the ocean tide. No matter how tightly you try to hold the waves, they slip through your fingers. Resist the current, and you'll exhaust yourself. But learn to float, to move with it rather than against, and you'll find a strange serenity. You're no longer trying to control what was never yours to begin with. The Stoics practiced this surrender every day. One of their exercises, premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of loss, wasn't about being morbid. It was about being strong. They would remind themselves, this person I love may leave, this thing I treasure may break, this season of life may end. Not to suffer twice, but to suffer less when the inevitable came. And because of that practice, they became calmer, more resilient, more alive in the moment. It's tempting to believe that if something mattered to us deeply, it should last forever. But that's not how life works. Friendships shift. Love evolves. People grow apart. That's not failure. That's rhythm. And when you understand the rhythm, you stop fighting the beat. So ask yourself this: what emotional weight are you still dragging simply because you refuse to accept that it was never permanent? Are you grieving the loss itself, or the illusion that it would never end? Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means seeing clearly without the fog of desperation. It means honoring what was real without demanding it to be eternal. People will come and go, but your peace, your center, that's something you can build. Something no one can take away, because the person who learns to flow with life suffers far less than the one who tries to stop the river. Now that we've embraced the truth of impermanence, let's take the next step. Because knowing that everything changes is only half the journey. The real challenge begins when your emotions start pulling you into chaos, and you're left wondering, who's actually in control here? Rule number 2. Master your emotions through rational thought. Have you ever sent a message to someone you care deeply about, something raw, honest, maybe even a little vulnerable, and then waited? Hours tick by, no reply. And as silence stretches, your chest tightens, thoughts race. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset with me? Have they already moved on? Suddenly, that small moment, just a gap in conversation, becomes a thunderstorm in your mind. But if you step back and look at it clearly, what actually happened? They didn't respond. That's it. Everything else, the anxiety, the self-doubt, the sinking feeling in your gut, was created not by them, but by your mind's interpretation of that silence. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." To the Stoics, emotions were not solid truths. They were echoes of how we think. Feelings like pain, sadness, or anger may seem automatic, but they don't rise from what happens to us. They rise from the meaning we attach to what happens. And that ... is both the hard truth and the freeing one. This is the heart of rule number 2. To detach emotionally, you must learn to master your emotions, not by suppressing them, but by mastering your thoughts. It's not about becoming numb, it's about becoming aware. Aware of the story you're telling yourself. Epictetus said it best. It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things. Life doesn't hurt us. Our interpretation of life does not take something as universal as a breakup. The relationship ends, and suddenly your world feels like it's falling apart. You replay every memory. You torment yourself over what you should have. Said differently, you ask questions that have no answers. How could they move on so quickly? Didn't it mean anything to them? But what if you paused the spiral and asked yourself instead, what are the actual facts here? The relationship ended. That's the fact. Everything else, the shame, the self-blame, the narrative that you weren't enough, that's the story. And stories can be rewritten. I remember a time something similar happened with a close friend. We had a deep talk one evening, one of those rare, open-heart kind of conversations. The next day, I sent a follow-up message. Hours passed, no reply, then a full day. By night, I was certain I had said something wrong. My mind started digging up every possible misstep. I was sure the friendship was damaged, but the next morning, they replied casually, warmly, like nothing had happened. Turns out, they had a sudden family emergency and hadn't checked their phone. Nothing was wrong. Nothing had changed. Except my mind had already built an entire drama in their silence. That moment hit me hard. The pain I felt wasn't caused by their delay, it was caused by the meaning I gave to their delay. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." And in that situation, I had let fear and insecurity color everything. I could have waited with calm and compassion. Instead, I chose to suffer in speculation. And that's the choice we all face every day. When emotions rise, do you take them at face value? Or do you pause and ask, is this real or just a reaction? The more you question your thoughts, the less power your emotions have over you. This kind of awareness isn't about becoming robotic, it's about becoming sovereign. It's about stepping into your role as the thinker of your thoughts, not the prisoner of them. The next time you feel anxiety creeping in, when anger builds or sorrow takes over, ask yourself, what am I really reacting to? What are the facts here, and what meaning am I layering on top? This kind of inner questioning takes discipline. It's not always easy, but it's how you begin to reclaim your emotional freedom piece by piece. Because once you start thinking clearly, you start feeling clearly. And that's when emotional detachment becomes something real, not just a concept, but a skill you carry through every challenge. Now that you've begun taking back the reins of your mind, it's time to explore how to build lasting emotional resilience, something that keeps you steady, even when everything around you seems to fall apart. Let's continue now that you've learned how to slow down your racing thoughts and reclaim control over your emotions. Let's take it one step further, into the space where preparation becomes your secret strength. Rule number 3, practice negative visualization for resilience. Have you ever caught yourself imagining something bad might happen, only to instantly shake your head and push the thought away? Maybe you pictured someone you love walking out of your life, or imagined everything stable in your world suddenly shifting without warning. And then your mind jumped in. Don't think like that. Be positive. Don't invite negativity. We've all been taught to silence those thoughts to avoid discomfort and focus on the bright side. But what if the Stoics believed the exact opposite? What if facing our fears head-on calmly, intentionally wasn't weakness, but strength in disguise? Marcus Aurelius, writing amidst the pressures of war and the weight of empire, once said, "Do not disturb yourself by imagining the whole of your life's troubles at once. Rather, as each arises, meet it with calmness and self-control." The Stoics didn't encourage us to dwell in despair. They trained us to prepare for it. This practice was called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. In modern terms, we might call it negative visualization. At first, the idea sounds backward. Why would anyone intentionally picture the loss of what they hold dear? But here's the truth. Everything you love, every relationship, every routine, even your physical body is temporary. You can deny that, or you can prepare for it. And preparation doesn't harden your heart, it strengthens your spirit. A few years ago, one of my closest friends told me they were thinking of moving across the world. We were like family daily conversations, shared dreams, inside jokes, that unshakable bond that makes the world feel safer. Suddenly, I was staring down the real possibility that they'd be gone. Not metaphorically, literally. One morning they'd just not be here. My first reaction? Denial. No way, they won't go. I'll figure something out. But the more I resisted, the more anxious I became. That's when I remembered the Stoics. So I began to apply what they taught. Each morning, I took a few minutes to imagine life without them, not as punishment, but as mental preparation. I pictured myself sitting at the cafe where we used to meet, this time alone. I imagined coming home after a hard day and not hearing their voice on the other end of the phone. Then I pushed further, envisioning new routines, different friendships, new ways to grow without them by my side. And when the day finally came and they did move, it still hurt. But it didn't break me, because I had already walked through that goodbye quietly in my mind 100 times over. That's the power of negative visualization. You don't do it to make yourself suffer ahead of time. You do it to soften the blow, to remind yourself that yes, you can survive the things you fear. You already have. Loss is not the end. It's a transition. Seneca once said, "He robs present ills of their power who has perceived their coming beforehand." In other words, if you see it coming, even just in your imagination, it can't knock you down the same way. When you stop expecting everything to stay exactly the same, you stop feeling entitled to permanence. And when you let go of that entitlement, the fear of change loosens its grip. Think about your own life for a moment. Maybe you're in a relationship right now, constantly anxious that it could end. You read into every text delay, every change in tone, every shift in rhythm. You tell yourself you're just being cautious, but deep down, you're afraid. Afraid of losing something you think you can't live without. But what if, instead of running from that fear, you walk toward it? Picture the worst-case scenario. Let yourself feel it. Then go further. Imagine who you'd become after it. What would you rebuild? What strengths would emerge? What friendships would deepen? When you do this regularly, something changes. The fear no longer controls you. You stop needing guarantees. You start trusting your resilience. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you love less. It means you see clearly. You fully enjoy what you have while you have it. And you prepare your heart for the moment it may no longer be there. That's not being morbid. That's being wise. So next time you feel yourself clinging tightly, ask, what exactly am I afraid to lose? And if I did lose it, could I still stand tall? Because the heart of Stoic resilience isn't about avoiding loss. It's about walking through the possibility of loss and realizing you are still whole. Now that you've strengthened your heart to face what may be lost, it's time to shift your focus to what's always been within your control. In the next rule, we'll uncover one of the most freeing Stoic lessons of all: learning to let go of what you never had power over in the first place. Let's continue. Now that you've strengthened your inner resilience by preparing for loss, it's time to focus on something even more liberating: reclaiming your energy by learning to let go of what was never in your control. Rule number 4. Focus on what you can control. Have you ever found yourself giving your absolute best to someone, being present, kind, thoughtful, and yet it still wasn't enough? They grew distant. They stopped showing up. And no matter how much love, time, or effort you poured into the connection, it felt like you were chasing a shadow, reaching for something that kept slipping further away. That kind of helplessness, the kind that comes when you're trying your hardest and still losing someone, can eat you alive. It leaves you questioning everything. What did I miss? What more could I have done? How do I fix this? But the Stoics knew a powerful truth. Suffering often begins the moment we try to control something that was never ours to command. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." One sentence. A lifetime's worth of freedom. Because if we're honest, most of the emotional pain we experience in relationships doesn't come from what the other person does. It comes from our need to control how they feel, how they act, or how they choose us. We twist ourselves into knots. We adapt, bend, adjust, even perform, hoping that if we just love them enough, do the right things, anticipate their needs, they'll stay. They'll love us the way we love them. But here's the harsh truth. You can't govern someone else's heart. I once found myself in a relationship where I constantly felt like I had to earn my place. I'd plan thoughtful dates, send kind messages, do everything to be attentive and caring. But the more I gave, the less I felt seen. They would withdraw. I would try harder. It became a cycle, me pouring out more and more, and receiving less in return. Eventually, I burned out completely. And only then did I realize the problem wasn't that I wasn't enough. The problem was that I was trying to control how they felt about me, something that was never in my hands to begin with. That's what this rule is about. Focusing only on what you can control: your thoughts, your actions, your choices. Nothing more. You can't make someone care. You can't force them to appreciate you. But you can choose how you show up in the relationship. You can choose whether to stay in a space that drains you, or to walk away with dignity. And once I stopped trying to manage their emotions and started managing my own expectations, something shifted. I found peace, not because they changed, but because I did. I let go of the illusion that effort alone could save what was already slipping away. In that surrender, I reclaimed something precious: my energy. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." And one of the greatest ways we waste our life is trying to fix people who don't want to be fixed, or waiting endlessly for validation that may never come. When your happiness depends on someone else's attention, you give them power over your peace. That's not love. That's captivity. Picture this. You're in a friendship where you're always the one reaching out, sending the texts, checking in, keeping the connection alive. But they never meet you halfway. You start to doubt yourself. You replay old conversations, trying to pinpoint the moment things shifted. But the Stoic path is not to spiral. It's to pause and ask, what part of this is actually mine to carry? You can't force someone to care. You can't make them prioritize you. but you can choose whether or not to keep investing your energy where it isn't returned. That choice, that moment of clarity is your power. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you cut people off or stop caring. It means you release the need for them to be anything other than who they are. You stop chasing. You stop making your inner peace conditional on their affection, approval, or consistency. You build emotional autonomy, a self that stands steady regardless of who enters or exits your life. There was a time in my life when I realized I had been giving too much weight to how others treated me. If someone was warm, I felt worthy. If someone was cold, I felt rejected. My sense of self was like a roller coaster, rising and falling with other people's moods. But when I began to apply Stoic principles, things changed. I started anchoring my worth in who I chose to be, not in how others responded to me. And that shift changed everything. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The pain, the rejection, the longing, that's not the obstacle. That's the path. Not a path to fix them. A path to fix your focus. So if you're asking, what can I do to make them come back? How do I make this work? You may be asking the wrong questions. Try this instead. What is mine to control? What is mine to release? Because the moment you stop fighting for control over what you can't change, something beautiful happens. You rise. Not in resentment, but in clarity. Now that you've learned to reclaim your personal power and stop chasing what was never yours to hold, we move to the final principle. In the next rule, you'll discover how to zoom out, how seeing the bigger picture can break the illusion that this one person or moment defines your worth. Let's continue. Now that you've learned to stop chasing what's outside your control and have reclaimed your inner power, it's time to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Rule number 5, reflect on the bigger picture. Have you ever been so overwhelmed by the end of a relationship that it felt like the ground beneath your life collapsed? Like nothing else mattered, your dreams, your plans, even your sense of self, all wiped out in the emotional fog? When you're in that kind of pain, it's almost impossible to see beyond the moment. Every hour drags, every memory stings, every silence feels endless. And the question playing on repeat in your mind is always the same. How do I move on from this? This is exactly where Stoicism becomes not just helpful, but vital, even life-saving. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have to assemble your life yourself, action by action, and be satisfied if each one achieves its goal as far as possible." In other words, zoom out. Take the long view, because this painful moment you're drowning in, it's not your whole story. It's a scene, not the script. When we become emotionally attached to someone, our perspective narrows. They become the center of everything. Our happiness, our sense of worth, our vision for the future, all tied to their presence. So when they leave, or when they disappoint us, it doesn't just feel like we lost them. It feels like we lost ourselves. But the truth is, you were always more than that person. You were always more than that chapter. I remember going through a breakup that shattered me, not because they mistreated me, but because I had unknowingly built so much of my identity around them. Who I was, how I felt, what I believed about the future. All of it was entangled with that one relationship. And when it ended, I felt like a hollow version of myself. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. Even the simplest parts of life felt gray. But one night, something shifted. I went for a walk alone beneath a quiet, starlit sky. And I asked myself just one question. Will this still matter 5 years from now? Does this one person truly define the meaning of my life? That single question cracked the illusion wide open. I began to remember parts of myself that had existed long before that relationship. The passions I had, the people who loved me, the purpose that still lived in me. And slowly, I started to rebuild. Not through distraction, but through perspective. That's what the Stoics teach us: to rise above the noise, to lift ourselves out of the narrow moment and look at life from a higher altitude. They remind us that every storm eventually clears. And when it does, you'll still be here, wiser, stronger, more grounded than before. Marcus Aurelius reflected often on how time carries everything away. He described it like a rushing river, each event appearing for a brief moment before it's swept away and replaced by the next. Time is like a river, he wrote, made up of events. As soon as a thing is seen, it is carried away, and another takes its place. So if you're hurting now, I'm not asking you to pretend you're not. I'm asking you to take a step back, zoom out. Look at the 5-year timeline of your life, or the 10-year view. How many moments like this have you already survived? And each time you rose, each time you became someone new. That's not an accident. That's growth. When you reflect on the bigger picture, something powerful happens. You stop letting temporary people or painful moments hold permanent power over your peace. You stop giving one difficult chapter the authority to define your entire story. And when you do that, your response shifts. You stop reacting from panic and begin responding from purpose. So if this message touches something true in you, take one small action. Comment the word perspective. Let it be your reminder to pause, to zoom out, to breathe, to remember this moment is not the whole of your life. And if you've stayed with me this far, thank you. This space was made for people like you. People who want to think deeper, live calmer, and rise stronger. Because emotional detachment isn't about shutting down. It's about waking up to the vastness of your life. To the reality that you are bigger than this pain. This isn't the end. It's the turning point. You've just walked through the fire of detachment. You've learned how to let go with clarity. You've faced the grief of emotional distance and accepted that not everything broken needs to be fixed. But here's the part most people miss. Detachment is not the finish line. It's the threshold, because once you stop chasing what doesn't serve you, a new question emerges. What am I running toward? You're no longer clinging to the past. But what are you holding now? Silence, emptiness, or space? Space that's waiting to be filled, not with distractions, but with something real, something solid, something worthy. This is the sacred turning point, where clarity must become action, where letting go becomes building, where all the energy you spent trying to save someone else finally returns home to you. And now, the real work begins. Not the work of forgetting, but the work of forging. Not avoiding pain, but rising through it. Because the deeper Stoic path is not just about learning how to stop needing others to feel whole. It's about learning how to become the right person for yourself. True Stoicism was never about emotional suppression. It was always about transformation. Not becoming less emotional, but becoming more unshakable, more self-anchored, more rooted in what you control and who you are becoming. So in part 2, we go deeper. We move beyond detachment and step into self-mastery, into rebuilding your life from the inside out, into becoming someone who no longer reacts to pain, but someone who creates peace no matter what or who comes or goes. Ready? Let's continue. Now that you've let go of what no longer serves you, and you've begun seeing your life from a higher perspective, it's time to take ownership, not just of your peace, but of how you protect it. Rule number 1. You don't owe anyone your breakdown. You're not here just to survive the loss. You're here to rise with renewed vision, to build a life so grounded, so led by your own values that no departure, no rejection, can ever shake your peace again. So let's begin. Have you ever poured your whole heart into holding a relationship together only to realize at some point that you were the only one holding on? You tried everything. You talked things through. You were patient, forgiving, understanding, even when you were hurting. You gave more than you had, and still nothing changed. They kept pulling away. You kept reaching out. And deep down, you thought, if I just try a little harder, maybe they'll come back. That's the trap so many of us fall into. The belief that love equals sacrifice no matter the cost. That if someone is slipping away, it must be your responsibility to hold them tighter. That if they're unhappy, you have to fix it. But the Stoics would challenge that story. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself." But let's be clear, this doesn't mean tolerating mistreatment. It means preserving your integrity even when others abandon theirs. It means taking responsibility for your own peace, not for someone else's chaos. You weren't born to be someone's emotional firefighter. You weren't placed here to bleed quietly just so someone else can avoid facing their own pain. Stoic path is not coldness. It's clarity. And clarity means recognizing the moment when your compassion has turned into self-destruction. Once heard the story of a woman who spent years in a relationship with a man who refused to grow. He would shut down, emotionally disappear for days, then reappear with half-hearted excuses. Each time, she welcomed him back with open arms. She believed that if she just showed enough love, eventually, he'd choose to stay for real. But one night, after another long silence, he said something that shattered her. He told her, "I never asked you to care so much." And that broke her, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. He never asked, but she kept offering. She had confused her willingness to love with responsibility. She thought that carrying his burden somehow proved her worth. In reality, all it did was bury her beneath someone else's unresolved pain. Seneca once said, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." And the truth is, suffering because of someone else's neglect isn't noble. It's misplaced. You don't need to keep explaining yourself to people who've already chosen not to understand you. You don't need to lose your identity trying to hold together something that's already falling apart, especially if you're the only one showing up. In these moments, detachment isn't a lack of love. It's the highest form of self-respect. It's being able to look someone in the eye and say, "I care about you, but I will not destroy myself to prove it." It's stepping out of the role of rescuer and realizing your energy is too sacred to waste on saving someone who has no interest in saving themselves. And here's the powerful truth. The moment you stop setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, you start to feel lighter. You start to see the difference between connection and codependency. You begin to breathe again, reclaiming the parts of yourself that had been begging for air beneath all the emotional weight. But here's the hard part. No one's going to give you permission to stop. You have to choose it for yourself. You have to decide that your peace matters more than their approval, that your dignity matters more than their confusion, That sometimes your silence will speak louder than any explanation they could ignore. The Stoics teach us to act with virtue, not to become martyrs, to show up with compassion, but never at the cost of clarity, to give when it's right, but never give ourselves away. So if you find yourself constantly explaining, constantly fixing, constantly giving more than you're receiving, step back. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've finally started seeing clearly. And once you learn to protect that inner calm, the next step is even more powerful. In the next part, we'll go deeper into how you can rebuild from that place of clarity, not just by detaching, but by choosing yourself with intention and creating a life that no longer bends for what breaks you. Ready? Let's keep going now that you've chosen to protect your peace, to stop explaining yourself and start honoring your worth. The next step is to rebuild from within, not to fill a void, but to create a life that's too meaningful to be shaken by someone's absence. Rule #2. Build a life so full you don't chase what's gone. There's a strange, hollow silence that follows the end of a connection. The messages stop, the calls fade out. The little routines you once built your day around: morning check-ins, evening goodnights, vanish overnight. And in that silence, something unsettling creeps in. You might think, I feel this way because they're gone. But what if the truth goes deeper than that? What if what you're actually feeling is not just the absence of a person, but the absence of your own life filling that space? The Stoics never obsessed over people. They obsessed over principles, over building a life that doesn't fall apart just because someone walked out. Seneca once said, "A great mind becomes a great fortune." In other words, if you want to stop being rattled by what leaves, start building something that no one, not a person, not a situation, can ever take from you. After a breakup or loss, most people try to distract themselves. New people, new places, noise, anything to drown out the silence. But Stoicism offers a different path. Don't run from the space they left. Step into it. Let that space become the room where you finally grow. I remember a man who thought he'd found the woman he'd marry. And then one day, without warning, she ended things. No explanation, just silence. He was devastated. Not just by her leaving, but by how much of his identity had been tied to her presence. For weeks he was paralyzed, grieving not just her, but the version of himself that only existed in that relationship. Then, slowly, something shifted. He stopped checking her social media. He stopped rereading old messages. And instead he made a list of everything he had put on hold for the relationship. Dreams he had shelved, hobbies he had abandoned, friendships he had let fade, and he began to rebuild. Not to prove anything to her, but to remember who he was before he forgot. He went back to the gym. He picked up painting again. He spent time with people who uplifted him instead of draining him. He stopped living on borrowed attention and started living from within. Months later, she reached out. But by then, he didn't need closure. He didn't need answers. He had become someone whose life was too full to chase what had already walked away. That's the kind of quiet resilience Stoicism creates. Not the cold kind that says, "I don't care," but the steady kind that says, "I'm building something so grounded, so fulfilling, that I don't have time to chase anything that no longer belongs." Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. That's not just a nice quote. That's a blueprint. Your routines, your health, your work, your learning. These aren't distractions from heartbreak. They are your foundation. The very bricks of your freedom. Letting go isn't just about removing someone. It's about replacing what they used to occupy with everything you've neglected. Because the moment your life no longer revolves around one person, you begin to see the world again. You notice beauty, you rediscover energy. You grow, and something else happens too. You become magnetic. Not because you're trying to be seen, but because you're finally rooted. So instead of asking, how do I get them back? Ask, what can I build now that they're gone? That's the shift. That's where detachment evolves into transformation. Your grief deserves space, yes. But so does your growth. So don't fill the silence they left behind with longing. Fill it with purpose, with action, with creation. And the more you do, the less their absence feels like a loss. And the more it starts to feel like you return to yourself. Next, we're going to take this transformation even deeper. Because sometimes rejection isn't a wound, it's a doorway. What feels like being pushed away might actually be life repositioning you for something far greater. Let's continue. After you've started to rebuild a life so full that you no longer chase what's left, there's something powerful that comes next. Learning to see rejection not as the end, but as the beginning of a deeper transformation. Rule number A: turn rejection into inner reinvention. There's a moment right after rejection where time feels like it just stops. You hear the silence. You reread the message. You notice the coldness in their voice or the distance in their eyes. And somewhere deep inside, something collapses. It's not just the plans you made with them, it's the story you were writing around them. The future you imagined. The version of yourself that only existed because they chose you. Rejection stings harder than we like to admit, not only because of what we lose, but because of what it forces us to face about ourselves. But the Stoics had a different lens. To them, rejection was never punishment. It was revelation. Seneca said, "It is when we are cast out that we find better ground." Sometimes, what feels like being pushed away isn't life turning its back on you. It's life clearing the unstable ground beneath you, so you can finally rebuild on something real. Most people shrink after rejection. They overthink. They blame themselves. They spiral through what ifs. What did I miss? What should I have done differently? But the wiser question isn't, why didn't they choose me? It's, why was I waiting to be chosen in the first place? I once knew a man who had been working for years toward his dream job. It was his goal, his vision, his everything. He made it all the way to the final interview. His hopes were sky high, his preparation flawless. Then, the email came. "We've decided to go in another direction." He was devastated. But it wasn't just the job. What shattered him was how much of his identity had been built around that one outcome. He didn't just lose a career opportunity. He lost a version of himself that was entirely wrapped around someone else's approval. But instead of staying in that dark place, he did something radical. He turned inward. He asked himself, what was I really after? Who do I want to become? Title or no title? He went back to his roots. He studied. He created. He built. 1 year later, he launched his own business in the same industry. And in a strange twist of fate, that very company later reached out to collaborate. But by then, he no longer needed their validation, because he had already validated himself. That's the shift. Rejection isn't a wall. It's a mirror. It reflects where you were giving your power away. It exposes your quiet insecurities and hidden dependencies. And if you're brave enough to face it, that mirror becomes a chisel. You don't just look at your reflection. You reshape it. Marcus Aurelius said, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Rejection isn't an obstacle to fear. It's the raw material for reinvention. It's the starting point for becoming a version of you who no longer begs to belong, but builds their own ground. This doesn't mean the pain disappears. You'll still feel the sting. The Stoics didn't deny emotions, they examined them. They asked, "What is this rejection teaching me about my ego? About my expectations? About the illusions I was clinging to?" And then, they let that lesson burn away everything that wasn't real. You are not here to be someone's backup plan. You are not here to sit quietly, waiting for permission to feel worthy. You are here to build something so deeply rooted, so self-led, that rejection becomes irrelevant, not because you're numb, but because you've remembered who you are. So next time you hear no, let it echo differently, not as a reminder of your failure, but as a symbol of your freedom, not as a sign of your lack, but of your potential. Because what left you was never the whole of who you are. Next, we'll go even deeper. We'll explore how to stop waiting for permission to live fully, how to shift from being chosen to choosing yourself. Let's continue. After rejection reshapes you from within, the real work begins, learning how to love, to let go, to feel fully, without falling apart. Because in your next chapter, clarity alone won't be enough. You'll need emotional wisdom, the kind that allows you to detach without losing your heart. Rule number 4. Detach. Without becoming numb, there's a moment in healing. When silence can feel like progress, you stop reaching out. You stop crying. You stop checking their profile or hoping for one last message. Their name no longer stings, at least not the way it used to. So you tell yourself, "I'm getting better." But if you look deeper, you realize something else. You're not really feeling better. You've just stopped feeling anything. You haven't healed. You've hardened. You haven't grown stronger. You've just gone numb. And that isn't Stoicism. That's quiet survival. And you deserve more than that. True Stoicism does not ask you to become cold. It does not glorify indifference. It does not praise emotional shutdown. What it calls for is something far more difficult and far more powerful. It calls for emotional wisdom. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it." That judgment, when left unexamined, can turn into two extremes: obsessive attachment or total emotional withdrawal. But the Stoic walks a third path, not to escape emotion, but to understand it, to live alongside it, to feel fully, without being ruled by it. To detach without becoming numb is an art. It's what I call warm separation. It's the ability to care without clinging, to love deeply, without losing yourself in the process, to give not to be needed, but because it's who you are. It's a quiet strength. Not loud, not flashy, but steady and unshakable. I once heard a story about a man named Elias. He was married for 7 years to a woman he loved deeply. From the outside, their life looked beautiful, stable, loving, complete. But inside, the intimacy was gone. She no longer saw him. Not really. Her attention drifted elsewhere. Her words became distant. Her affection faded. Still, he held on. Not because he didn't see the truth, but because he didn't know how to walk away from something he had poured his soul into. Then one evening, he found her journal left open. Not out of curiosity, but instinct. He read a page. It was filled with her thoughts. How disconnected she felt. How trapped. How she longed for something more alive, more passionate. His first reaction? Devastation. His second? Detachment. But not the kind that heals. The kind that numbs. He shut down. No fights, no tears, no conversation. Just silence. From the outside, he looked composed. People said, "He's handling it well." But inside, he felt nothing. He had buried his emotions under a mask of false stoicism, confusing suppression for strength. It wasn't until a close friend looked him in the eye and asked, "When did you stop showing up for yourself?" That something cracked open. For the first time, he let himself feel the grief, the anger, the heartbreak. He admitted, "I miss her. I feel abandoned. I feel invisible." And in finally naming those feelings, he found something he hadn't had in months: clarity. He didn't explode. He didn't collapse. He simply told her the truth. "I love you, but I refuse to become invisible to keep this alive." And with that, he let go. Not with bitterness, not with coldness, but with calm, with boundaries. That is what it means to detach without going numb. You don't sever your heart. You stretch it toward yourself. You don't reject love. You refine it. You don't close off from intimacy. You become more discerning about who earns a place in your inner world. Seneca once said, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." The challenge isn't in avoiding emotion. It's in feeling without drowning. It's in showing compassion, even as you walk away. It's in releasing someone, without locking yourself away from love forever. To detach, in the Stoic sense, is to live with an open heart and open eyes, but with a spine made of tempered steel. You don't let pain harden you. You let it sharpen you. You don't become emotionless. You become emotionally sovereign. The world may try to tell you that numbness is power, that ghosting is maturity, that disappearing is strength. But Stoicism teaches something far more radical. Real strength is staying present. It's staying soft. It's staying principled, even in the face of rejection, uncertainty, or loss. It's the courage to feel and still choose virtue over bitterness. So if you're in the middle of detachment right now, ask yourself honestly, are you building walls or are you setting boundaries? Are you shutting down or are you sitting with the discomfort until it teaches you something? Are you withdrawing in fear or stepping back with clarity and intention? Because the goal is never to feel less. The goal is to feel everything and still be able to choose your response. That is warm detachment. That is emotional maturity. That is Stoic power. And once you master that balance, feeling deeply, yet standing firmly, you unlock the final truth. You never needed them to complete you. You were already whole. They were just one chapter. After learning how to detach without hardening, you discover something even deeper. The truth that you were never missing anything. You were never broken. You were always whole. They were just a chapter. Rule number 5. You were always whole. They were just a chapter. There comes a quiet, almost sacred moment in healing when the fog starts to lift. The silence no longer feels suffocating. The endless questions begin to lose their grip. You stop replaying old conversations. The what-ifs and if-onlys fade into the background. And in that calm, something unexpected rises. You start to feel yourself again. Not as a weight, not as a wound, but as a presence. A center, a grounded sense of self that feels familiar. and yet brand new. For the first time in a long time, you realize you weren't broken. You were just distracted from yourself. When someone walks away, it can feel like they took a piece of you with them. A part of your identity, your sense of safety, your rhythm, your home. But that's an illusion, because what's essential, your values, your growth, your soul can't be taken. They didn't carry your worth out the door. They simply played a role in a particular chapter of your story. And like every chapter, it was meant to end. The Stoics were masters of perspective. They reminded us to see life not through emotion, but through proportion. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And what greater outside event could there be than the presence or absence of someone you loved? But if you spend your life measuring your value based on who stays and who leaves, you'll never stand still long enough to discover who you truly are. You are not defined by who stayed. You are not diminished by who walked away. You are not a project waiting to be completed by someone who may never return. You were whole before they arrived. You are whole now. You've simply forgotten how quiet wholeness can feel. When you've grown used to emotional noise, I remember a story about a young man who fell deeply in love during one of the most uncertain seasons of his life. She brought color to his days, structure to his chaos, and hope to his routine. Together, they planned everything: vacations, future homes, even the names of children they hadn't yet conceived. It felt like the world finally made sense through her, but when it ended, he was completely unmoored. Because somewhere along the way, she had become the story, and he had become a side character in his own life. For months, he spiraled. Sleepless nights, unsent messages, endless scrolls through old memories, rereading her texts like sacred scripture. But nothing brought her back. Eventually, not from strength, but from sheer exhaustion, he stopped reaching. And something beautiful happened in that stillness. He picked up his guitar again. He reconnected with old friends. He began to write not about her, but about himself. His voice returned. His posture straightened. And he remembered what it felt like to live without orbiting someone else's world. One evening, sitting alone on a quiet balcony, coffee in hand, he looked out at the night sky and thought, "I'm okay." Not because the pain had vanished, but because the pain had done its job, that had carved space for him to come home to himself. That's the Stoic gift of perspective. Time doesn't erase meaning, but it reveals it. What once felt like the end of everything becomes a turning point. What once consumed you becomes something you outgrow, and what once defined you becomes a footnote in a much longer story, a story you are still writing. Seneca said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." If heartbreak is adversity, then detachment is proof that you've grown. Not by forgetting someone, but by remembering who you were before you bent your identity to fit their love. So yes, they mattered. Yes, they shaped you. But no, they were not your whole book. They were a chapter, a paragraph, maybe even a single beautiful word. But you are the author. In this page, this is the one where you stop writing for their attention and start writing for your integrity. Because the greatest freedom isn't in moving on. It's in moving inward, into yourself, into your values, into your peace, into your power. And yes, you will love again. But next time, you won't love from a place of emptiness. You'll love from fullness. You won't love to be rescued. You'll love to share, not to be completed, but to offer the meaning you've already built within yourself. And when you do, it won't feel like losing yourself again, it will feel like being met by someone who finally recognizes how whole you already are. This is not the end. This is the part where you remember everything you were chasing in someone else. You've always carried inside you. You just needed to slow down long enough to hear your own voice again. After remembering that everything you were searching for was already within you, there's only one thing left to do: close that chapter and begin again, this time with your whole self. So take a deep breath. Close the door, not with bitterness, not with regret, but with the quiet, grounded confidence of someone who has finally come home to themselves. And the next time you catch yourself holding on too tightly to someone who no longer shows up, to memories that no longer serve you, or to a version of love that only ever lived in your mind, pause. Just pause. And ask yourself gently, honestly, who has more control right now? My emotions or me? That's where emotional freedom begins. Not by cutting people off in anger, not by pretending you no longer care, but by seeing clearly, by choosing clarity over chaos, peace over proving, stillness over struggle. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, the things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts. So if your thoughts are drenched in fear, in longing, in desperation, you'll drown in them. But if you train them toward virtue, toward strength, toward inner steadiness, your soul becomes unshakable. Detachment is not apathy. It's sacred discernment. It's having the courage to walk away, not because you stopped loving, but because you finally remembered your worth. It's the strength to let silence speak louder than another round of unspoken arguments. And it's the wisdom to realize that being ignored isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's redirection. You don't owe anyone your breakdown. You don't need to collapse just to prove you cared. The Stoic way is simple, but not easy. It's feeling everything deeply and then acting wisely. It's processing your grief, not performing it. Choosing your response instead of reacting blindly, because every time you respond with dignity instead of desperation, you take back a piece of your power that was never theirs to hold in the first place. Letting go hurts, but so does holding on to something that slowly erodes your self-respect. And when you stop begging for closeness that costs you your center, you discover a quiet miracle: yourself still here, still whole, stronger, clearer, more you than ever. So if this message found you at just the right moment, leave a comment below with the words inner freedom, a reminder to yourself and to others that peace isn't something you chase, it's something you claim. And if this video gave you even a few quiet minutes to reflect, to breathe, to feel, consider subscribing. Not out of pressure, but as a simple, quiet decision to continue walking this path toward clarity, calm, and conscious living. Because detachment isn't the end. It's the beginning of authorship, of turning silence into strength, of transforming loss into wisdom. And in the next video, we'll explore what comes after letting go, how to rebuild a life so powerful, so rooted in who you are, that no person, no absence, no loss can ever take it from you again. But until then, be gentle with your healing, be ruthless with your boundaries, and be faithful to your own becoming. You are already enough. Now go protect that.